In the last video, we finally got the 1300 crossflow lump installed. I noticed that this channel hit a big milestone of 20,000 subscribers. I sort of roughly set the ignition timing. I did it wrong. Let me explain. Rule of 9 when setting the valve clearances. There is an easier way to do it. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and today I've come round the garage to make a bit of a follow-up on the last video. And for those of you that didn't see it, in the last video we finally got the 1300 crossflow lump installed into the engine bay of Heidi, my hearing aid beige GL Mk2 Escort. But there was a couple of things that loads of you guys mentioned in the comments of the last video that I want to address in this video. One thing that I may have actually done wrong, and another thing that I didn't do that loads of you guys suggested that I do. Now before we get into that, this morning I noticed that this channel hit a big milestone of 20,000 subscribers. So I want to send a massive thanks out to each and every one of you that has subscribed to this channel. I really appreciate your support. As I've always said, you know, as long as people are watching these videos and following me on the journey of messing around with my cars, etc., then I will continue to make the videos. I'm absolutely blown away by the amount of support I get from you guys that watch these videos. I make a point of, you know, not diluting who I am in any way. You know, I do things my own way. I am my own person and I just film it for anyone who's interested. And the fact that 20,000 people have clicked subscribe to decide to continually follow me on my journey is awesome. So massive thanks to each and every one of you and long may it continue. All right, so I'm going to start this video by removing the HT leads and the spark plugs and the rocker cover. Alright, so you'll notice that I haven't bothered noting which cylinder each HT lead came off of, but that's not going to matter because even though in the last video I sort of roughly set the ignition timing, it turns out that I did it wrong. Let me explain. So this engine is now in the position that it was when I thought that I roughly set the ignition timing in the last video. So the notch on the pulley is facing towards the first notch there, which is 12 degrees before TDC, and that means that the rotor arm, if I take the dizzy cap off, is facing this way. So it's facing this cylinder, which I marked as number 1. And when I set the ignition timing, in my mind, I just needed to make sure that cylinder 1 was at TDC, and it is when that notch is around here. The actual TDC mark is the one on the right-hand side, but, you know, the timing needs to be just before TDC, really, so I set it to 12. So, you know, if I was to wind this engine around a little bit more to that last mark, piston 1 would be at the top of the cylinder, and in my mind both of these valves are closed. So I thought that that means that cylinder 1 is at TDC on the compression stroke, which is where it wants to be when you fire the spark plug for cylinder 1. But loads of you noticed that when I was winding this, you know, sort of around TDC forwards and backwards, and I was showing you the screwdriver going up and down in cylinder 1, what loads of you noticed was that the two valves on cylinder 1 were rocking. So you'll see that number 1 valve is going down there, and then if I go forward the engine, the second valve starts going down, and then if I go back again, the first valve starts going down. So even though both valves are closed, you know, these are up at TDC, that doesn't necessarily mean we're on the compression stroke, which is the stroke you want it on when you fire spark plug 1. And that's because on the exhaust stroke, at the top of the stroke, both valves will still be closed. As the piston's coming up and pushing the exhaust gases out, the exhaust valve will be open, and then when it gets to the top, the exhaust valve closes and the inlet valve opens, because after that, as the piston goes down, it draws in more fuel and air. So if it's on the compression stroke, which is where you want it to be, it means that both valves will be closed whilst the piston's at the bottom of the stroke, and then still closed all the way up to the top, and then all the way closed again as the piston goes all the way back down again. So therefore the valves wouldn't be, you know, these two valves wouldn't be opening and shutting around TDC. They would be shut if I was to wind this engine back so that the piston goes down the bore, they would be shut all the way down. And then if you wind the engine forward, as that piston goes up, they would still be shut, and then still be shut at TDC. And then if you wind it forward again and have the piston go down again, they would still be shut, because on the compression stroke, the valves are shut whilst the piston is compressing the fuel and air, and then when the piston gets to the top of the bore, the spark plug fires and then forces the piston back down the bore, and the valves would still be shut. So in short, although the mark is around the TDC mark, the fact that these valves are, opening and shutting around TDC means that this is actually on the exhaust stroke, and that essentially means that the ignition timing is 180 degrees out, because the crank spins twice as many times as the cam. So that notch will come back around when it is TDC on the compression stroke, and then it will go back around at TDC on the exhaust stroke. But whilst the crank turns twice, the cam only turns once. Now, to solve a situation where you are exactly 180 degrees out, all you have to do really is adjust these leads. So that's on like that. So at the moment, this is number 1. So you could just have number 1 over here. So you just move everything around 2 places, basically. But another thing that you guys, or one of you guys, mentioned in the comments is that the way this Dizzy's sitting at the moment with the clip over here to hold the Dizzy on, that's going to be really awkward to take the Dizzy cap off when the inlet manifold is fitted. So ideally, I want the Dizzy to be turned slightly so that you've got one clip over here and one clip over here. So whilst I'm, readdressing my mistake with the ignition timing, I can actually adjust how the Dizzy is situated in the block as well. But before I rectify my mistake with the ignition timing, there's another thing that you guys mentioned in the comments, and that was the valve clearances, or the tappet clearances. And this was something that I kind of just decided I was going to do when the engine was warm. I wasn't going to worry about it for now, but one of you guys made me realise that in the Haynes manual, there's actually settings for the valve clearances when the engine's cold as well as when the engine's hot. And I've got my Haynes manual over here, and as you can see here, it says valves, and we go down to valve stem to rocker arm clearance. That's what we're talking about. And you've got cold and hot settings. So the cold settings are that the inlet valve clearances should be 0.01 inches, that's 10 thousandths of an inch, or 0.25 millimeters, and the exhaust valve clearances should be 22 thou or 0.56 millimeters. So on this engine, we've got the exhaust side, which is this side, and the inlet side, which is this side. And if we look down at the engine here, or at an angle like that, you'll see that the exhaust port is here. So this is an exhaust valve, and the inlet port is here, and this is an inlet valve. So it's exhaust, inlet, then it's inlet, exhaust, exhaust, inlet, inlet, exhaust, I believe. And the valve clearance is basically the clearance between this rocker arm and the valve when the valve is closed. So when the valve's closed, this rocker arm isn't touching the top of the valve. It only touches the top of the valve when the camshaft decides it's time for whichever valve to open, and then this pushes down on the valve. This pushes down because this side is pushed up by the push rod, which is, being pushed up by the cam, which is in the bottom end of these. So essentially, we need to measure the gap between this arm and the top of the valve when the valve is completely closed. Or when the valve is completely closed and the rocker arm is as far away from the valve as it's going to get. Now, people usually use a rule of 9 when setting the valve clearances. So what that means is that when number 1 valve is fully open, i.e. this rocker arm is pushing it all the way down, so you basically watch the spring compressing, and when it's as compressed as it will be, before you turn it further, which means the spring starts uncompressing. So when that valve is fully open, you then set the clearance on valve number 8, because 1 plus 8 equals 9. And then you know, and so on, basically. So when number 2 valve is fully open, you then set the clearance on valve number 7, because 2 plus 7 is 9, etc. The rule of 9. But when you've got a standard cam, you know, as this engine has, there is an easier way to do it. And it kind of relates to what I was saying earlier on with the ignition timing. So you essentially treat these as pairs, and it's worth noting that in terms of the bottom end, the engine, pistons 1 and 4 will come up at the same time, whilst pistons 2 and 3 are going down, and then vice versa. As pistons 2 and 3 come up, pistons 1 and 4 go down. So you've always got 2 pistons up, you know, at the same time, essentially, you know, 1 and 4 and 2 and 3. Now, I mentioned earlier that what I realise now, or what I've reminded myself, thanks to you guys, is that even though cylinder 1 at the moment is on its exhaust stroke and not its compression stroke, both valves are still closed, you know, momentarily at TDC. And what that means is that when cylinder 1 is at TDC on the exhaust stroke, and both of these, you know, valves are rocking, essentially, what that means is that the valves on cylinder 4 are fully closed, you know, on the compression stroke. So, you know, whilst we're at bang on TDC, if I adjust this down here to be bang on TDC, cylinder 1 is on the exhaust stroke and cylinder 4 is on the compression stroke. So that means that with cylinder 1 at TDC on the exhaust stroke, you can actually measure both valves on cylinder 4. You know, these are now not pushing down on the valve at all. So, you know, you treat them in pairs, and basically when you've got cylinder 1 at TDC on the exhaust stroke, you measure the clearances on both of the valves on cylinder 4, and vice versa. If you was to turn this 180 degrees now, so that both pistons 1 and 4 will be at TDC, but the other way around. So piston 1 will be at TDC on the compression stroke, and piston 4 will be at TDC on the exhaust stroke. That means you'll be able to measure the clearances on cylinder 1. And then you do the same with these 2 pairs. So when cylinder 2 is at TDC on the exhaust stroke, you measure these 2 valves and then turn it over another 180 degrees so that both of these pistons are at TDC again, but vice versa in terms of their stroke, yeah, you can measure the other pair. So that's the way that I'm going to measure these valve clearances. I just hope that semi made sense. I can visually show you with the screwdriver because you can't rely on the notch on the pulley when you're doing cylinders 2 and 3, of course. So in simple terms, you put the screwdriver in cylinder 1 and turn the engine over until you find that it's at top dead centre. So when the screwdriver gets as high as it will go, essentially, before it then starts going down again. So it's going up and it's going down. So you find where the highest point is. So that'll be there. And because we know that cylinder 1 and cylinder 4 both go up at the same time, we know that cylinder 4 is up as well. So then you basically need to figure out which one of these are on the compression stroke and which one is on the exhaust stroke. So one of these 2 cylinders at TDC, you'll have, you know, 1 valve closing and 1 valve opening. If you was to rock it to and, you know, past TDC, you'll have 2 valves opening and closing, and on the other one of those 2 cylinders that move together, you know, you won't have the valves moving at all. Now, we already know that it's going to be cylinder 1 that's rocking and cylinder 4 isn't, but I'll just show you that. So I'm just going to rock it past TDC, and you can see that those valves there are rocking, but these ones here aren't. They're staying still. So we'll get this back to TDC again, so when neither of the valves is moving essentially, but also when this screwdriver is at the top, and we'll measure these 2 valves. So I've actually got 2 sets of feeler gauges here, and I've just kept them on either side of the engine bay because it gets confusing with these valves, you know, they're not in order. Yeah, so I've already got to make sure I'm measuring the exhaust or the inlet, so I've got some feeler gauges here that add up to, what was it, 0.56 millimeters, which is for the exhaust side. And then over here I've got some feeler gauges that add up to well, one feeler gauge that's 0.25 millimeters, which is for the inlet. So we're going to be measuring these two valves. One is an inlet, one is an exhaust. We can see that this one here is lined up with the exhaust port, so this is the exhaust, so this one needs to be 0.56. We'll slide that under there, and that is way too loose, so we need to adjust this rocker and make this, you know, down a bit. All right, so we'll tighten this nut up. Needs to be tightened up quite a bit, to be honest. So that's now a nice tight fit in there. You know, it slips in, a little bit of resistance, so that valve clearance is set. But before we turn the engine any further, we can set this one, which is an inlet valve, and that needs to be 0.25 of a mil. And yeah, this one's really loose as well. And I'm guessing they're all going to be too loose because we've refurbished the cylinder head, you know, we've recut the valves into the head. Also, some of you might have noticed that when we rebuilt the head, although we laid out all the springs and stuff in order, we then ended up putting them back in the reverse order. So for instance, this spring and valve and stuff was there, this one was there, etc. But I always knew that, you know, because we fully rebuilt the head, I was going to have to recheck the valve clearances anyway. It's just that I assumed that you couldn't set them cold, so I was going to run the engine and then set them. But yeah, same procedure. Going to tighten this nut up until this 0.25 fits nice and tight. Right, that's still pretty loose. Yeah, and that's about right. So those two are now set. So what I would do next is, because I know that when you turn this engine over further, pistons 1 and 4 are going to go down, and then 2 and 3 are going to go up. Now, based on what we know in terms of the firing order, essentially, because although the way the ignition timing set up at the moment, I've got number 1 spark plug firing, but we know that's wrong now. So at the moment, you know, number 4 spark plug would be firing. And because what we know in terms of the firing order, which is 1, 2, 4, 3 on this engine, we know that the next cylinder that's going to be on the compression stroke, i.e. the next cylinder that is to fire, essentially, would be number 3. But even if you didn't know that, you know that when you turn the engine over further, 1 and 4 pistons are going to go down, and 2 and 3 pistons are going to go up. So you could put the screwdriver into number 2, which is going to be right at the bottom of the bore, of course, and then turn the engine over and watch as the screwdriver comes up. Got to use 2 hands because it's getting jammed. So you keep winding this up until this screwdriver gets to the top of the bore, and you know, find where TDC is, find the point where the screwdriver stays at the top and doesn't go down. So roughly there, and then you'd figure out which one of these 2 cylinders is on the rock, i.e. you know, the valve is sort of, the valves are opening like this as you're doing that with the spanner, and which one of these 2, you know, the valves aren't rocking. Now we know it's going to be number 3, as I've just said, but if I just rock this spanner forwards and backwards, you'll see that number 2 is rocking. Those valves are opening and closing, and number 3 isn't. You know, those valves are staying closed, they're staying up. So then we'll find the point where these 2 aren't moving anymore, i.e. the point at where this screwdriver is at the top, where, you know, both of these cylinders are at the top. So we'll look at these 2 valves. Take the screwdriver out because it keeps getting lodged on the side of the bore where this is at a funny angle, and we'll just watch the valves. So we want to get to the point where neither of these valves are moving, about there. So we know that these 2 cylinders are at the top of the bore, and because these were the ones that are moving and these weren't, it means we check and adjust the clearances on these two valves, and then just continue with the same process. You'll turn the engine over a bit further and 1 and 4 will go to the top again, but this time you check 1 and 2 valves, then wind it over again until, you know, these two come up again, and you'd adjust these two. So, you know, that's the process of checking the valve clearances. I'm actually not going to crack on with doing the rest now because I need to get out of here. My beautiful girlfriend Kat is waiting for me because we're going around to her parents for dinner, but I just wanted to come around here and make this follow-up video from the last video. But before I do go, I want to correct my mistake with the ignition timing. So what I'm going to do now is turn this engine over until the notch is at 12 degrees before TDC, and this time I want to do it so that the number 4 cylinder valves are rocking and number 1 cylinder valves aren't rocking, so then we know that we're at TDC on cylinder 1 on the compression stroke, and then I can set up, you know, which lead goes where, etc. Right, so I've actually gone round one too many times, but I'll just show you. So if I put that notch on the TDC mark, this pulley's got so many other knocks out of it because it's not in the best shape that I was getting confused, but yeah, this is the mark and it's lined up with TDC, but we're actually back with number 1 on the exhaust stroke. As you'll see, if I rock the spanner, you'll see that these two valves are moving. So we know that that's not right. So we need to turn it over again until that mark comes back around again. So you're turning the crank 360 degrees essentially, which is actually only turning the cam 180 degrees. So we're there. So this time, if I'm rocking the spanner, cylinder 4 is rocking, but cylinder 1 isn't, because that's on the compression stroke. So we'll put this back exactly to TDC. In fact, we'll put it at 12 degrees before TDC because you want the spark to occur just before TDC. Either 10 or 12 degrees if I remember rightly. So yeah, it's at that mark now, which is 12 degrees before. And then we need to make sure that whilst the engine's where it is now, number 1 spark plug is firing. So if we take this cap, or if you line this cap up where it would be if it was clipped on and take it off, you'll see that the spark, the rotor arm's facing this way. So that would mean that this lead here is actually spark plug number 1. But I want to turn this dizzy round so that this clip isn't so awkward. So I'll undo this nut here, which will free up the dizzy, and yeah, sort that out. With that screw loose, the dizzy will now rotate. Let's take that off. And I basically want to move it so that this clip is away from the block. It does unfortunately bring this rusty vacuum thing into sight a bit, but I think when the air filter's on you still won't see it. So yeah, I want to have the dizzy around there. We'll put this back on. So really and truly, we're now going to make this one number 1. So if I sort of put my finger, so that will be there, and then take the cuff off, I basically need to turn the dizzy so that this rotor arm is facing where my finger is, roughly. It's about there. So we'll turn this dizzy a bit more. Yeah, about there. And actually, some of you guys were saying that a proper way to see that it's actually on the firing bit is with this cam on here, these lobes on the cam, because they're what open these points to actually spark the engine. So maybe I should do it like that, which will mean, so I might be wrong, but the way I see it is that the spark will occur when these start to open, which would be around there. So I'm guessing that's roughly the point where the spark would be occurring. Put the rotor arm on. At this lead here. So although I marked this one before, and if I didn't touch the dizzy at all, I could have literally just made this one number 1, because you know it was 180 degrees out. Because I've adjusted where the dizzy sits to make it more convenient to take the cap off, it's now meant that this one is number 1. So I'll transfer this bit of tape to this cylinder here, and yeah, that will be number 1. That rotor arm is now roughly facing at this one when the engine is at roughly 12 degrees before TDC. So I'll do that screw back up with my Imperial 3/8 spanner, and then we'll make sure the cap's on properly, and then we know that this one is cylinder 1. Just going to place this on for now because I still do need to come back round and finish doing the valve clearances. But we now know that this one is number 1. And I won't put the spark plugs back in yet either, because it's easier to turn the engine over by hand when I'm doing the valve clearances with the spark plugs removed. So I'll put my bit of tape that I did have on this one onto this one, because we now know that this is number 1. And then using what we know about the firing order, we can work out what the others are. So if this is 1, this one will be 2, this one will be 4, this one here, and then this one will be 3. 1, 2, 4, 3, because that's the firing order of a crossflow. So based on that info, I'll be able to work out what the other leads are when the time comes. But for now, you know, I've got number 1 marked, and yeah, that's good enough, because as I say, this has all got to come apart again when I actually do these valve clearances. Now I really do need to get out of here. This video seems very rushed, and I hope I haven't missed anything out. If I have, please do put it in the comments. I just wanted to follow up on, you know, the mistakes that I made in the last video. And yeah, as I always say, massive thanks out to everyone who regularly gets in touch with your advice. You know, I don't claim to know what I'm doing. I have got some experience with these old crossflow engines, but not for years and years and years, and I'm really enjoying getting stuck into this one. And yeah, any help and advice that I get from you guys is very much welcome and appreciated, so massive thanks. But right now I do need to get out of here. I'm going to end this video here. I will be back in a few days for another video, possibly on Esther, my ST170 powered Mark 1 Escort. It's actually now less than 2 weeks until I'm going to be taking her and maybe Maud to the Classic Ford show at the South of England showground. So yeah, really looking forward to meeting loads of you guys there. But yeah, for now, if you thought this video was any good, do give it a thumbs up and a share. Check out all the links in the description to my social media and my own website and my email address and that sort of thing. Massive thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. But yeah, other than that, I'll chat to you soon.